CEO falls desperately for janitor poet who refuses to be his charity case. Chapter 1. 42 floors above the city's restless heartbeat, Weston Langford sat surrounded by the spoils of ambition that had long since lost their shine. Quarterly reports blurred into meaningless numbers on his mahogany desk, each projection representing millions in revenue that couldn't fill the hollowness where his chest used to house something resembling a soul. 3 years. 3 years since Elena's funeral taught him that success meant nothing when you had no one left to share it with. Full of 18-hour days and weekend board meetings, building an empire that felt more like a mausoleum with each passing month. The cleaning crew's arrival barely registered anymore. Invisible people maintaining the pristine facade of corporate achievement, their presence as unremarkable as the air conditioning that kept his corner office at precisely 72 degrees. But tonight, something cut through his practiced indifference. A voice. Rich, melodic, carrying words that sounded like poetry rather than conversation. They walk through crystal corridors, never seeing the hands that keep their world spotless. Weston's pen stilled. Through the glass partition separating his office from the reception area, he glimpsed her, a woman moving with unconscious grace despite the utilitarian uniform, her dark skin luminous under harsh fluorescent lights. She wore wireless earbuds, speaking in rhythm to whatever played through them, completely absorbed in her own creative universe. She couldn't be much older than her mid-30s, with natural hair swept into a style that emphasized elegant bone structure most people would pay surgeons to achieve. Everything about her moved like water, fluid, purposeful, mesmerizing in ways that had nothing to do with her circumstances and everything to do with her essence. Weston found himself standing, drawn to the window by a magnetic pull he hadn't felt since before grief turned his emotional landscape into permafrost. This woman wasn't just earning a paycheck. She was creating something beautiful in a space designed for function over form, transforming mundane tasks into something that looked almost sacred. Her earbuds slipped out, and spoken-word poetry continued playing from the tiny speakers, something about dignity in overlooked spaces, about seeing beauty where others saw only necessity. Their eyes met through the glass. Time fractured. Weston felt something crack inside his chest, the first fissure in 3 years of emotional concrete. "I apologize, sir." Her voice carried traces of education and refinement that her uniform tried to mask. "I didn't realize anyone was still here. I can come back." "No." The word emerged sharper than intended. Weston stepped toward the partition, close enough to see intelligence flickering in her dark eyes. "Please continue. I was just leaving." But he made no move toward his briefcase or computer shutdown. Instead, he watched her nervous energy, the way she kept glancing at his face as if trying to reconcile the man with whatever assumptions she'd been carrying. Her phone buzzed against the cleaning cart. The poetry notebook she'd tucked beside her supplies tumbled to the marble floor, pages scattering like secrets she hadn't meant to share. Handwritten verses in careful script revealed themselves, raw talent disguised as maintenance equipment. Weston moved before thinking, dropping to gather the scattered dreams. His hand brushed hers as they both reached for the same page. Electric shock. Pure, undeniable, impossible to rationalize away. Their fingers lingered few seconds longer than accident could explain before she pulled back, clutching the rescued papers against her chest like armor. "Thank you," she whispered, but her voice carried undertones he couldn't interpret. Embarrassment, certainly, but something deeper. Recognition, maybe. An awareness that occurred when two people caught each other's gaze across impossible distances. Weston had caught enough words from the scattered pages to understand what he'd witnessed. Raw honesty and transformative insight. "You write about invisible people," he said quietly. She stood slowly, still clutching her notebook. "Everyone's invisible to someone. But you see them. I am them." The simple honesty in those words hit him like a physical blow. Here was someone who understood what it meant to be overlooked, dismissed, reduced to function rather than recognized for humanity. And somehow, through her art, she was fighting back with grace instead of bitterness. Weston watched her gather supplies and head for the door, something fundamental shifting in his understanding of what mattered. As she disappeared into the hallway, one question echoed in the sudden silence. What would you risk to have someone truly see you? If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our Dear Love Diaries family. Your special place in this community of heartfelt stories is waiting for you. These passionate journeys of souls connecting against all odds have brought together thousands of beautiful hearts just like yours. Make sure you hit the bell too, so you'll know immediately when a new story unfolds in our diary of love. 4 weeks passed before Weston learned her name was Amina Davis. 4 weeks of manufacturing reasons to work late, hoping to catch glimpses of the woman who'd somehow cracked open something he thought had died with Elena. He told himself it was curiosity, nothing more. Professional interest in unexpected articulation from an overlooked employee. The lies he told himself were becoming more transparent daily. Amina Davis held a master's in English literature from State University, graduated summa cum laude despite working multiple jobs throughout school. 2 years teaching high school before budget cuts eliminated her position. Now she cleaned offices from midnight to 6 a.m., caught 3 hours of sleep, then worked afternoon shifts at Murphy's Diner downtown. Between jobs, she wrote poetry that could stop conversations if anyone bothered to listen. Weston discovered these details through discreet observation and questions, not because he was investigating her, but because he couldn't stop thinking about the way her voice had sounded reciting verses in the fluorescent-lit darkness of his sterile corporate world. "You've been different lately," Roger Willis observed during their Wednesday morning meeting, his earnest face creased with concern that made Weston wonder when his protégé had started worrying about him like a son might worry about a father. "More engaged, I guess. Like you're actually here instead of somewhere else." Weston glanced up from market projections, realizing he'd been genuinely listening to quarterly analysis instead of mentally reviewing conversations he wanted to have with someone whose last name he'd only recently learned. "Different how?" "You asked some follow-up questions about the Morrison acquisition. Last month, you would have approved it without reading past the executive summary." Roger paused, studying Weston's expression. "And yesterday, you laughed at something Jim said." "I can't remember the last time you laughed at anything." Had he laughed? Weston couldn't recall the specific moment, but lately he found himself more present in daily interactions, as if someone had adjusted the focus on a lens he hadn't realized was blurred. Everything seemed sharper, more immediate, more worth paying attention to. "Maybe I'm finally getting enough sleep," he lied smoothly. Roger nodded, but his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "Whatever's changed, keep it up. The team responds better when you're actually engaged with what we're doing." Engaged. Such a simple concept, but Weston was beginning to understand how long he'd been absent from his own existence, managing responsibilities while his actual self remained locked away somewhere safe and numb. Yolanda King's suspicions, meanwhile, were crystallizing into the kind of focused attention that had made her both invaluable and dangerous throughout their 15-year partnership. "Security mentioned unusual patterns in your office access," she said during their Tuesday lunch at Le Bernardin, her sharp eyes cataloging every micro-expression that crossed his face. Yolanda possessed predatory instincts and the patience to wait for weakness to reveal itself. "Staying until midnight, weekend visits. Are we facing financial pressures I should know about?" "No financial pressures." "Then what requires such intensive personal oversight?" Weston chose his words like a chess player considering 7 moves ahead. "I'm taking a more hands-on approach to operations. Making sure we're not missing opportunities at the ground level." "What kind of opportunities?" "The kind that require direct observation rather than filtered reports." Technically accurate, though the opportunity he was most interested in observing had nothing to do with profit margins and everything to do with the way Amina's expression softened when she talked about her brother's acceptance to medical school. Hakeem Davis was everything Amina had described: brilliant, genuinely committed to serving communities that healthcare typically forgot. Weston had learned this through their late-night conversations, not because he was planning anything specific, but because understanding Amina's motivations felt essential to understanding her. Hopkins offered him full academic scholarship, she'd told him the previous Thursday, her face glowing with pride as she organized files on his conference table. Plus research stipend. But living expenses in Baltimore. The pride had dimmed slightly as practical reality intruded on celebration. How much short? Weston had asked quietly. Enough that I'll need extra shifts. Maybe a third job. Her tone carried no self-pity, just matter-of-fact acceptance of what needed to be done. Weston had wanted to offer assistance immediately, but something in her posture warned him off. This was the woman who wrote poetry about dignity that couldn't be purchased, who'd made clear she wouldn't accept charity disguised as kindness. Hakeem's fortunate to have someone fighting for his dreams, he'd said instead. I'm fortunate to have something worth fighting for. Now, sitting across from Yolanda's calculating stare, Weston realized how completely his priorities had shifted. Quarterly reports that once consumed his attention felt secondary to conversations about family loyalty and dreams that required sacrifice to achieve. You're being evasive, Yolanda observed, dissecting her salmon with surgical precision. That's uncharacteristic. I'm being private. There's a difference. Privacy suggests you have something to conceal. Before Weston could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. His pulse accelerated as he recognized Amina's writing style, open mic tomorrow night. The midnight mic, 8 p.m. If you want to see what happens when invisible people refuse to stay hidden. An invitation. Finally. Excuse me, he said, standing abruptly. I need to handle something urgent. Now? We're discussing quarterly projections. It's important. Yolanda's eyes narrowed, but Weston was already heading for the exit, his mind racing with possibilities and the overwhelming need to respond immediately. Outside the restaurant, he typed quickly, I'll be there. Thank you for trusting me with this. Her response came within minutes, don't thank me yet. You might not recognize what you see. Try me. Okay. But Weston? Yeah. This isn't your world. Don't expect me to translate afterward. The warning should have given him pause. Instead, it made him smile. Amina Davis had no idea how ready he was to have his carefully constructed world completely dismantled. Drop a comment below and share a time when someone saw potential in you that you didn't see in yourself. Your story might inspire someone else in our community. Friday's elevator malfunction felt like destiny disguised as mechanical failure. The car had been groaning between floors for weeks, maintenance promising repairs that never materialized because corporate buildings operated on timelines that prioritized profit over passenger convenience. Weston was leaving his office near midnight when the elevator lurched to a stop between 38 and 39, emergency lighting casting everything in amber shadows that made the confined space feel more intimate than claustrophobic. No cell service. No immediate rescue. Just him and his thoughts and air that gradually grew warmer. 20 minutes later, the car shuddered and dropped another few inches before stopping completely. The emergency phone produced only static. Then he heard her voice echoing up through the elevator shaft, clear, concerned, unmistakably Amina calling from somewhere below. Hello? Is someone trapped up there? Weston pressed the intercom button. Yes. Between 38 and 39. Okay, I'm calling security. Just stay calm. Stay calm. Easy advice from someone who wasn't suspended in a steel box with nothing but regrets and quarterly reports for company. Weston loosened his tie, wondering when he'd last been forced to sit still without work to distract him from the emptiness where contentment used to live. 15 minutes passed before the elevator motor engaged again, lowering the car slowly to stop with a gentle bump at 37. The doors opened to reveal Amina holding a security radio, her expression shifting from concern to something more complex when she recognized him. "Are you hurt?" she asked, stepping closer before catching herself. Physical distance reasserted itself, but not before he noticed how her eyes had scanned his face and body, checking for injury with the same attention she brought to everything else. "I'm fine. Thank you." Neither moved. The elevator doors began closing, and Weston reached out instinctively to stop them. The elevator might malfunction again. Amina looked at him for a long moment, weighing possibilities against consequences. Then she stepped into the elevator. "Which floor?" she asked, finger hovering over the button panel. "Parking garage." "You?" "Same." The doors closed, sealing them into a space that suddenly felt charged with potential despite its mundane purpose. Amina stood on the opposite side of the car, but Weston found himself hyper-aware of her presence, the steady rhythm of her breathing, the faint scent of cocoa butter on her skin, the way she managed to fill the entire space with her energy while maintaining physical distance. "Thank you," he said again. "For helping. Security would have found you eventually. But you found me first." Something in his tone made her look at him directly, and Weston felt that crack in his chest widen. Up close, her eyes were even more expressive than he'd realized, intelligent, unimpressed by expensive suits or corner offices, completely focused on him as a person rather than a position. "Why do you work such late hours?" she asked quietly. The question surprised him. When had someone last asked about his choices rather than simply accommodating them? "Habit," he said, then realized how hollow that sounded. "My wife died 3 years ago. Work is easier than everything else." Amina's expression softened, but not with pity. Understanding, maybe. Recognition that grief was a familiar companion rather than a foreign concept. "I'm sorry," she said, and he could hear that she meant it. That must be incredibly isolating. Isolating. Such a precise word for such a complex emptiness. Weston had spent 3 years convincing himself he was functional, building something Elena would have been proud of. But standing in that elevator with someone who saw through his armor, he finally acknowledged the truth. "Yes," he said simply. "It is." The elevator reached the parking garage and stopped. The doors opened, but neither moved toward the exit. "Can I ask you something?" Weston said. Amina nodded. "Your poetry. The verses I heard that first night. Do you perform anywhere?" She studied his face, searching for something he couldn't identify. "Why?" "Because talent like yours shouldn't remain hidden." "Hidden from whom?" "People like you." The challenge in her voice sparked something unexpected in his chest. Here was someone who wouldn't be impressed by wealth or intimidated by position. Someone who demanded honesty instead of deference. "Hidden from everyone," he said simply. "Including yourself." Amina stepped out of the elevator, then turned back to face him. "There's a place called the Midnight Mic, open mic nights on Thursdays. But it's not." She gestured at his tailored suit. "It's not designed for your demographic." "What's my demographic?" "Country clubs. Wine tastings. Places where people discuss art instead of feeling it." Weston stepped out of the elevator, moving closer without conscious intent. Close enough to see gold flecks in her dark eyes, close enough to notice how her breathing had shifted. "You don't know anything about me," he said, but without heat. "And you don't know anything about me. Then maybe we should change that." The words hung between them, loaded with possibility and danger. Amina's lips parted slightly, and for one impossible moment, Weston thought she might say yes. Instead, she stepped back. "Good night, Mr. Langford." "Weston," he called as she walked toward her Honda Civic. "My name is Weston." She paused but didn't turn around. "I know who you are." As she drove away, Weston stood alone in the empty parking garage, feeling more awake than he had in years. Something fundamental had shifted, some barrier had developed its first crack. For the first time since Elena's death, he was looking forward to tomorrow. Chapter 2. Thursday night brought Weston to a place he'd never imagined himself seeking, standing outside the Midnight Mic, where exposed brick walls and dim lighting created an atmosphere his usual haunts avoided like a contagious disease. Jazz drifted up from below, mixed with voices that carried genuine laughter instead of networking calculations. He'd told himself this was research, nothing more. Due diligence on talent assessment. But the nervous energy coursing through his system suggested something far more dangerous than professional curiosity. The Midnight Mic defied every assumption he'd unconsciously held about spoken-word venues. The crowd was sophisticated, intellectually engaged, discussing philosophy and social justice with raw honesty that his corporate world spent millions trying to manufacture in focus groups. These weren't angry activists shouting into microphones. These were artists who understood language as a weapon capable of transforming pain into beauty. Weston claimed a corner table, ordering coffee that actually tasted like coffee instead of the corporate-approved substance served at board meetings. Around him, conversations flowed about identity and authenticity and the courage required to speak truth in spaces designed for silence. Then Amina took the stage. She wore dark jeans and a flowing top that moved like water when she gestured, her hair loose around her shoulders in ways that made his fingers ache to touch those soft curls. But when she began speaking, everything else disappeared. They measure worth in corner offices and investment portfolios. Her voice carried to every corner of the packed room, rich and commanding and absolutely hypnotic. But I've witnessed more dignity in a janitor's closet than in 1,000 boardroom presentations. Weston's breath caught. She was talking about him, about them, about the impossible chasm between their worlds. But her words carried no bitterness or resentment. They were profound, observational, honest in ways that made his chest tight with something between shame and admiration. I clean up after dreams abandoned for quarterly projections, she continued, moving across the small stage like poetry made flesh. I dust photographs of families forgotten in pursuit of market dominance. I empty trash cans full of discarded humanity. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every syllable. Weston found himself leaning forward, studying her face as she transformed personal experience into universal truth that cut through pretense like a blade. But here's what they don't understand, Amina's voice dropped to an intimate whisper that somehow reached the back row. Dignity isn't earned through achievement. It's inherent in existence. And no amount of wealth can purchase what some of us are born knowing. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. But Weston barely heard it. He was watching Amina's face as she scanned the crowd, her eyes stopping when they found his corner table. Surprise flickered across her features, followed by something that might have been pleasure before the professional boundary reasserted itself. She left the stage without acknowledging him directly, but Weston felt the invisible current connecting them across the crowded room. When she finally approached his table 20 minutes later, he stood automatically, a gesture of respect that seemed to catch her off guard. "You came," she said simply. "You invited me. I didn't think you'd actually show up." Weston pulled out her chair, another automatic courtesy that made her pause before sitting. "Why?" "Because this isn't your universe. Maybe my universe is smaller than I realized." Amina studied his face, looking for signs of condescension or cultural tourism. Weston met her gaze steadily, letting her see whatever she needed to see. "Your performance," he said quietly. "It was extraordinary." "Which part? The part about cleaning up after your demographic, or the part about dignity that can't be bought? The part about being born knowing things wealth can't teach?" That answer seemed to surprise her. Amina tilted her head, reassessing him in real time. "What do you know about dignity, Weston Langford?" The question hit deeper than she probably intended. Weston was quiet for a long moment, watching her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. "I know what it's like to lose everything that matters while keeping everything that doesn't," he said finally. "I know what it's like to be surrounded by people who need things from you while never actually seeing you. And I know what it's like to go through the motions of existing while feeling completely hollow inside. Amina's expression softened, the distance melting into something warmer. Your wife. Elena. She died in a car accident while I was in Tokyo closing a deal I can't even remember now. I spent the years after telling myself that work was enough, that building the company would somehow honor her memory. But tonight, listening to you. He paused, struggling with words that felt too big for his mouth. Tonight I realized I've been hiding. From what? From feeling anything real. The admission hung between them like a confession. Around them, the venue continued its gentle buzz of conversation and music, but their table felt separate, intimate, charged with possibilities neither was ready to name. Why are you telling me this? Amina asked softly. Because you're the first person in years who's made me want to feel anything. The words escaped before Weston could censor them. Too honest, too raw, too much for a first real conversation. But Amina didn't retreat. Instead, she leaned slightly forward, her dark eyes searching his face. That's dangerous, she whispered. I know. I'm not looking for someone to rescue me. I'm not looking to rescue anyone. I'm looking to figure out how to save myself. That answer seemed to break something open in her expression. Vulnerability flickered across her features before she caught herself, but not before Weston glimpsed the loneliness she carried, different from his, but just as profound. I should go, she said, but made no move to leave. Should you? My shift starts in 2 hours. I need sleep. When do you sleep? When I can. Weston thought about his empty penthouse, his king-sized bed where he stared at the ceiling most nights, and felt ashamed by the luxury of his insomnia. Come with me, he said impulsively. Where? Somewhere we can keep talking without time limits. Amina looked at him for a long moment, weighing possibilities against consequences. Then she surprised them both. Okay. They drove separately to Riverside Park, where city lights reflected off dark water and benches offered space for conversations that couldn't happen in corporate buildings or poetry venues. The October air carried bite but not cruelty, perfect for walking off the nervous energy that surrounded them like electricity. Tell me about your brother, Weston said as they found a bench overlooking the water. What about him? You work multiple jobs to put him through college. That requires sacrifice. Amina was quiet for a moment, her hands clasped in her lap. Hakeem is everything our father wasn't. Focused, determined, genuine. He wants to be a doctor, serve communities like ours where healthcare is hope rather than reality. Someone has to make sure he gets that opportunity. And you're that someone. I'm all he has. What about what you want? What I want doesn't matter if Hakeem doesn't get his chance. Weston turned to face her more fully. That's not true. Easy to say when you've never had to choose between your dreams and someone else's future. You're wrong. The words came out sharper than he intended. I chose Elena's dreams for the company over spending time with her. I chose deals and acquisitions over dinners and conversations. I chose everything that seemed important until the only thing that actually mattered was gone. Amina's expression softened again. That's different. Is it? You're sacrificing your poetry career for your brother's medical school. I sacrificed my marriage for business success. Both of us chose other people's needs over our own desires. The difference is Hakeem's dreams are worth the sacrifice. Your deals weren't worth losing Elena. Weston felt that observation hit his chest like a physical blow. Not because it was cruel, but because it was absolutely accurate. No, he said quietly. They weren't. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching water move around rocks and contemplating choices that couldn't be unmade. Finally, Amina spoke again. Why did you really come tonight? Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. That's not smart. Nothing about this is smart. Amina turned to study his profile in the dim park lighting. What do you think this is, Weston? I don't know. But I know I feel more alive sitting on this bench with you than I've felt in board meetings and business dinners. And what happens when the novelty wears off? When you remember that I clean your offices and you sign my paychecks? What happens when you stop assuming I'm looking for novelty instead of connection? The challenge in his voice made her look at him more closely. For the first time since they'd met, Amina seemed to really see him, not the CEO, not the wealthy widower, but the man who'd been sleepwalking through life until her poetry woke him up. This is complicated, she said finally. Everything worthwhile is complicated. Your business partner won't approve. Your social circle won't understand. Your dead wife's family will probably hate me. Let me worry about them. And I won't be your project, Weston. I won't let you fund my poetry career or pay for my brother's education or rescue me from circumstances you think are beneath me. What if I'm not trying to rescue you? What if I need you to rescue me? That stopped her short. Amina stared at him, processing the shift in power dynamics he was suggesting. From what? From a life that looks successful but feels empty. From years of going through motions without meaning. From forgetting what it feels like to want something more than quarterly profits. And you think I can do that? I think you already started. The admission hung between them, vulnerable and dangerous and absolutely honest. Amina's breathing had quickened slightly, and Weston found himself studying the curve of her lips, the way her pulse was visible at the base of her throat. This is insane, she whispered. Probably. We barely know each other. I know you write poetry that could change how people see the world. I know you work multiple jobs to support your brother's dreams. I know you have more dignity in your little finger than most people achieve in entire lifetimes. And I know that when you look at me, you see something other than my bank account or business reputation. What do I see? You tell me. Amina was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face in the dim light. I see someone who's been sleepwalking, she said finally. Someone who built walls so high he forgot there was supposed to be a door. Someone who's terrified to want anything real because real things can be lost. And someone who might be worth the risk of finding out what happens when those walls come down. The words sparked something electric in the space between them. Weston felt his heartbeat accelerate, felt the control he'd maintained for years starting to fracture around the edges. Amina, he said, and her name felt different in his mouth. More intimate, more precious. Yeah. I want to see you again. Not accidentally in elevators or parking garages. Intentionally. As often as possible. That's not possible. Why not? Because you're you and I'm me and the world doesn't work that way. What if we make it work that way? How? Weston reached for her hand without thinking, covering her smaller fingers with his own. The contact was electric, sending heat up his arm and into his chest, where something had been frozen for years. I don't know yet, he admitted. But I know I haven't felt this alive since before Elena died, and I know that has everything to do with you. Amina looked down at their joined hands, her breathing definitely quickened now. When she looked back up, her eyes held a mixture of desire and terror that probably matched his own expression. This could destroy everything, she whispered. Or it could save everything. You don't understand the risk I'd be taking. Then help me understand. Amina pulled her hand free, but gently, as if the loss of contact affected her too. Men like you don't fall for women like me, Weston. You get curious, you get infatuated, maybe you even convince yourselves it's real. But eventually you go back to your own kind, and women like me are left picking up pieces we should have been smart enough to protect. You're assuming I'm like other men. Aren't you? I don't know. I've never felt like this before. Not even with Elena. The question should have felt like betrayal, but it didn't. It felt like someone finally asking him to be honest about the difference between comfortable love and earth-shifting passion. Elena and I grew up together. We loved each other the way people love familiar things, deeply, safely, predictably. What I'm feeling right now. He paused, struggling for words. This is different. Scarier. More intense. More intense how? Like I could lose myself completely and not care, as long as I was lost with you. Amina's breath caught audibly. For a moment, the distance she'd been maintaining wavered, and Weston glimpsed the want in her eyes before she looked away. I need to think, she said finally. About what? About whether I'm brave enough to find out what happens next. Weston wanted to push, wanted to convince her with words or touches or promises he wasn't sure he could keep. Instead, he forced himself to respect the space she needed. Take all the time you need, he said. But Amina? Yeah. I'm not going anywhere. And I'm not changing my mind. She looked at him one more time, something like hope flickering in her expression before she stood to leave. Good night, Weston. Good night. As she walked away, Weston remained on the bench, watching her figure disappear into the darkness and wondering what the hell he was doing. He realized he'd rather risk everything than go back to that numbness. Even if everything included his heart, his reputation, and the control that had kept him functional since Elena's death. Even if loving Amina Davis turned his entire world upside down. Chapter 3. 2 weeks dissolved into a rhythm of stolen moments and charged encounters. Weston discovered reasons to work late that had nothing to do with quarterly reports and everything to do with the possibility of finding Amina in his doorway. She began cleaning his office with deliberate slowness, their conversations evolving from polite exchanges to discussions about literature, philosophy, and the strange isolation that came with their respective positions. Neither acknowledged the shift directly, but the air between them grew denser with each interaction, heavy with possibilities neither was ready to name. You're different, Roger Willis observed during their Friday morning meeting, his earnest face brightening with something that looked like relief. Present, I guess. Like you're actually living in your life instead of managing it from a distance. Weston glanced up from the Henderson portfolio, realizing he'd been genuinely engaged with market analysis instead of mentally rehearsing conversations with a woman whose smile had become more important than stock projections. Different how? You asked Jim about his daughter's college acceptance. Last month, you would have nodded and moved on to the next agenda item. Roger paused, studying Weston's expression. And yesterday, you actually disagreed with something I proposed. Constructively. I can't remember the last time you engaged with ideas instead of just approving them. Had he? Weston couldn't recall the specific moments, but lately he found himself more invested in daily interactions, as if someone had turned up the color saturation on a photograph he hadn't realized was faded. Maybe I'm finally paying attention, he said. Roger smiled. Whatever's changed, don't change it back. The team needs you here, not just physically present. Here. Such a simple concept, but Weston was beginning to understand how long he'd been operating on autopilot, managing responsibilities while his actual self remained locked away somewhere safe and numb. Yolanda's suspicions sharpened. Security flagged unusual access patterns, she announced during their Tuesday lunch at Le Bernardin, her predatory instincts fully engaged. Late nights, weekend visits. If we're having cash flow issues, I need to know. No cash flow issues. Then what requires such intensive personal supervision? Weston selected his words with surgical precision. I'm implementing more direct oversight of operations. Making sure we're not missing ground-level opportunities. What kind of opportunities? The kind that require personal observation rather than departmental summaries. Not technically a lie, though the opportunity he was most interested in observing had nothing to do with profit margins and everything to do with watching Amina's face light up when she talked about her brother's medical school interviews. Hakeem Davis was everything Amina had promised, articulate, passionate about serving under-resourced communities, genuinely committed to using his education for something beyond personal advancement. Weston had learned this through questions asked during their late-night conversations, not because he was planning anything specific, but because understanding Amina's motivations felt essential to understanding her. Hopkins accepted him, she'd told him the previous Thursday, pride radiating from her as she restocked his bookshelf supplies. Full academic scholarship plus research stipend. But living costs in Baltimore. The celebration had dimmed as reality intruded on triumph. How much? Weston had asked quietly. Enough that I'll need another job. Maybe overnight security somewhere. Her voice carried no complaint, just practical assessment of what needed to happen. Weston had wanted to offer help immediately, but something in her posture warned him off. This was the woman who'd written about dignity that couldn't be purchased, who'd made clear she wouldn't accept assistance disguised as generosity. Hakeem's lucky to have someone who believes in his potential, he'd said instead. I'm lucky to have something worth fighting for. Now, sitting across from Yolanda's calculating stare, Weston realized how fundamentally his priorities had shifted. Quarterly metrics that once consumed his attention felt secondary to conversations about sacrifice and dreams that required everything to achieve. You're deflecting, Yolanda observed, cutting her salmon with clinical precision. That's unlike you. I'm being private. There's a difference. Privacy suggests you have something to hide. Before Weston could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. His pulse quickened as he recognized Amina's direct style, poetry slam tomorrow night. The Midnight Mic, 8 p.m. If you want to see what happens when invisible people demand to be seen. An invitation. Finally. Excuse me, he said, standing abruptly. I need to handle something. Now? We're discussing quarterly. It's urgent. Yolanda's eyes narrowed, but Weston was already moving toward the exit, his mind racing with possibilities and the overwhelming need to respond immediately. Outside the restaurant, he typed quickly, I'll be there. Thank you for trusting me with this. Her response came within minutes, don't thank me yet. You might not like what you discover. Try me. Okay. But Weston? Yeah. This isn't your world. Don't expect me to make it comfortable for you. The warning should have concerned him. Instead, it made him smile. Amina Davis had no idea how ready he was to have his comfortable world completely shattered. Share in the comments, have you ever faced a choice between your pride and someone you love's future? How did you decide? Friday night at the Midnight Mic pulsed with different energy than Weston's previous visit. The venue was packed, anticipation crackling through exposed brick walls as poets prepared for the monthly slam competition. $2,500 for first place, plus a slot in the citywide championship. Enough money to solve Hakeem's financial gap for an entire semester. Weston found his usual corner table, but this time he wasn't hiding. Several people had recognized him from business publications, their curiosity obvious but respectful. The Midnight Mix crowd might be diverse, but they weren't naive about power dynamics or the significance of his presence. Amina appeared on stage wearing dark jeans and a flowing top that moved like liquid when she gestured, her natural hair framing her face in ways that made Weston's chest tight with want. But it was her presence that commanded attention, confident, unapologetic, completely herself in ways his corporate world never allowed. This piece is called Glass Towers, she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed room. It's about the difference between seeing and being seen. She paused, her eyes finding Weston's across the crowded venue. For just a moment, she smiled, small, private, meant only for him. Then she transformed, becoming something larger than herself. They built monuments from other people's labor, she began, her voice building power with each word. Glass and steel towers reflecting everything except the true cost of construction. Weston felt his chest constrict. She was talking about him again, but differently this time. Not with anger or judgment, but with understanding that felt more dangerous than criticism. I've walked through those lobbies at 4 a.m., Amina continued, moving across the stage like controlled fire. Mopped marble floors that cost more than most people's annual income. Emptied wastebaskets full of discarded dreams and abandoned conscience. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. Weston found himself leaning forward, studying her face as she transformed personal experience into universal truth that cut through pretense like a blade. But here's what I learned about glass towers, her voice dropped to an intimate whisper that somehow reached every corner. The people inside are just as trapped as the people outside. Maybe more so, because they built their prisons and convinced themselves it was freedom. Weston's breathing quickened. She was seeing him, really seeing him, in ways that made him feel exposed and understood simultaneously. I met a man who lived in the highest glass tower. Amina's eyes found his again, holding his gaze as she spoke directly to him while addressing everyone. Surrounded by luxury but suffocating on loneliness. Rich in everything except the currency that matters. The room had disappeared. There was only Amina on stage and Weston in the darkness, connected by words that felt like confession and challenge and invitation all at once. And I realized something, she said, her voice building to a crescendo that made the entire venue hold its breath. The difference between seeing and being seen isn't about position or perspective. It's about courage. The courage to recognize that we're all just people, desperate to matter to someone, afraid of being forgotten. She paused, letting the silence stretch until it became almost unbearable. The courage to shatter the glass. The applause was thunderous, but Weston barely heard it. He was watching Amina's face as she left the stage, the way her eyes searched for his reaction, the vulnerability that flickered across her features. She'd won. Of course she'd won. The judge's decision was unanimous, the audience's response overwhelming. But as Weston watched her accept congratulations and prize money, he realized she'd given him something far more valuable than a performance. She'd given him permission to demolish his glass tower. When she finally reached his table, Weston stood automatically, that ingrained courtesy that seemed to surprise her every time. "Congratulations," he said quietly. There aren't adequate words. "Thank you." Amina sat down, but her energy was still elevated from performing, her skin glowing with excitement and accomplishment. "The prize money will cover Hakeem's living expenses for 6 months. Her smile was radiant, unguarded in ways he'd never seen before. "He can focus on studying instead of working part-time. You must be proud." "I'm relieved." "There's a difference." Weston studied her face, recognizing the distinction. Relief suggested burden lifted. Pride suggested goals achieved through personal effort rather than external assistance. "Your poem," he said. "The Man in the Glass Tower," was inspired by recent observations. Amina's expression grew more serious. "But Weston, what I said on stage doesn't change our fundamental problem. Which is, we still exist in different universes. Tonight was beautiful, but tomorrow you go back to your boardrooms and I go back to my cleaning cart. What if I don't want to go back? To what? Your job? Your life? You can't just abandon everything because you're having feelings. What if these aren't just feelings? What if this is the most real thing I've experienced in years?" Amina leaned back in her chair, studying his face with the same intensity she'd brought to her performance. "What are you saying, Weston?" "I'm saying I want to see where this leads. Not secretly, not just in empty offices and poetry venues. I want to take you to dinner. I want to meet your brother properly. I want you to meet the people who matter to me. And when your business partner objects? When your social circle raises eyebrows? When your dead wife's family starts asking uncomfortable questions? Then I'll handle it." "How?" "By choosing what matters over what's convenient." Amina was quiet for a long moment, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup, her dark eyes searching his face for something she couldn't name. "This is insane," she said finally. "I know. It could destroy your reputation. My reputation means nothing if I'm not living authentically. And my independence? My pride? My promise to myself that I'd never need rescuing? What if this isn't about rescuing? What if it's about two people choosing to build something together? Build what? I don't know yet. But I know I want to find out." The words hung between them, loaded with possibility and danger in equal measure. Around them, the venue continued its celebration of spoken word and artistic expression, but their table felt separate, intimate, charged with decisions that could change everything. "Weston," Amina said quietly. "Yeah? If we do this, if we try this, I need you to understand something." "What?" "I won't change who I am to fit into your world. I won't apologize for my background or my circumstances or my ambitions. And I won't let you pay for things just because you can afford them and I can't. I wouldn't ask you to change anything. And I understand about the money. Do you? Because it's going to be difficult sometimes, watching me struggle with things you could fix with a phone call. Then teach me how to support you without rescuing you." That answer seemed to surprise her. Amina tilted her head, reassessing him in real time. "You really mean this, don't you? I've never meant anything more. Even though it's complicated and risky and probably doomed? Especially because it's complicated and risky. The safe choice has been killing me slowly for years." Amina was quiet for another long moment, her breathing slightly quickened, her eyes holding his with an intensity that made his chest tight. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay? Let's see what happens when we shatter the glass." The word sent electricity through Weston's entire nervous system. For the first time in years, he felt completely alive, completely present, completely committed to an outcome he couldn't control or predict. "What does that mean, practically?" he asked. "It means you pick me up tomorrow night at 7. It means we have dinner somewhere that isn't trying to impress anyone. It means we figure this out one day at a time. And your concerns about our different worlds? Still valid. But maybe you were right about building something new instead of trying to fit into existing spaces." Weston reached across the table, covering her hand with his own. This time, she didn't pull away. "Amina?" "Yeah. Thank you." "For what?" "For being brave enough to shatter the glass first." Her smile was radiant, unguarded, full of possibility that terrified and thrilled him simultaneously. "Just remember you asked for this when everything gets complicated. I'm counting on complicated." As they sat together in the dimly lit venue, hands intertwined across the small table, both knew they were crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Whatever happened next would require courage neither had been sure they possessed. But for the first time in years, both were ready to find out what lay beyond the safety of their separate glass towers. Chapter 4. Saturday evening found Weston standing outside a modest apartment building in a neighborhood he'd driven through but never actually seen. The contrast to his penthouse was stark: worn brick, small windows, children playing on stoops while neighbors called greetings across fire escapes. There was authentic community here that his sterile luxury building couldn't manufacture with all its expensive amenities. Amina answered her door wearing a simple sundress that somehow made her more beautiful than any designer gown could have achieved. Her natural hair fell in loose curls around her shoulders, and she wore minimal makeup that enhanced rather than masked her features. "You came," she said, and he caught the slight surprise in her voice. "Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you might reconsider once you saw where I live." Weston looked past her into the small apartment, clean, organized, decorated with books and art that reflected intelligence and taste rather than expensive acquisitions. "It's perfect. It's tiny. It's yours." Something in his tone made her study his face more carefully. "Come in. Hakeem wants to meet you." The young man who emerged from what must have been a bedroom looked exactly like Amina had described, intelligent and genuinely warm. At 19, Hakeem Davis possessed confidence that came from being raised by someone who believed in his potential. "Mr. Langford," he said, extending his hand with a firm grip. "Amina's mentioned you. Weston, please. And she's told me about Hopkins. Congratulations." "Thank you. I still can't quite believe it." Hakeem's smile was genuine, without the practiced politeness Weston usually encountered. "Amina says you've been encouraging her poetry. Your sister's talent speaks for itself. I'm just smart enough to recognize it. Not everyone would be. Most people see the uniform before they hear the words." Weston felt the gentle test in Hakeem's observation. This wasn't hostility, but it was an assessment. Could he acknowledge reality without becoming defensive? "Most people make assumptions based on surface appearances," Weston agreed. "I'm trying to do better." Hakeem nodded approvingly. "Good answer." "Hakeem," Amina warned, but her brother just grinned. "What?" "I'm supposed to make sure he's worthy of my sister." "I'm not a prize to be won," Amina said firmly. "No," Weston agreed, looking directly at her. "You're a person choosing to spend time with someone who's trying to deserve that choice." The answer seemed to satisfy both siblings. Hakeem grabbed his jacket from a chair. "I'm meeting friends for a study group," he announced. "You two have fun, but not too much fun." "Hakeem." He kissed his sister's cheek and shook Weston's hand again. "Take care of her, but don't try to rescue her. She'll never forgive you for that." After he left, Amina shook her head ruefully. "Subtle as a brick. I like him. He's protective without being controlling. He's all the family I have left." "Then I'm honored he approved." "Don't get too excited. His approval comes with conditions." "Such as?" "Treat me well or answer to him." And despite being 19, Hakeem can be surprisingly intimidating when he wants to be. Weston smiled. "Noted." They drove to a neighborhood restaurant Amina had chosen, the kind of place where the food was exceptional but the atmosphere prioritized conversation over impressing anyone. Over dinner, their courtship dance evolved into genuine intimacy. "Tell me about Elena," Amina said as they shared dessert, her voice gentle but direct. Weston had been dreading this conversation, but looking at Amina's open expression, he realized she wasn't asking out of jealousy or comparison. She was asking because understanding his past mattered to building their present. "We met in college," he said slowly. "Grew up in the same social circles, shared the same assumptions about how life was supposed to work." She was kind, intelligent, beautiful in traditional ways. Safe. Safe how? "She never challenged me to be better than I was. Never pushed me out of my comfort zone. Never made me question whether the life we were building together was what either of us actually wanted." "That sounds lonely." "It was comfortable. I thought that was enough." "And now?" Weston met her eyes across the small table. "Now I understand the difference between comfortable and alive." "What's the difference?" "Comfortable doesn't require growth. Alive demands it." Amina was quiet for a moment, processing his words. "Do you feel guilty for moving on?" "Every day. But not because I'm betraying her memory. Because I'm finally becoming the man she deserved to marry in the first place." "What kind of man is that?" "Someone who chooses connection over control. Someone who values authenticity over approval. Someone brave enough to build something real instead of settling for something predictable." "And you think you can be that man? With you?" "I think I already am." The admission hung between them, vulnerable and honest and completely without pretense. Amina's breathing had quickened slightly, and Weston found himself studying the pulse point at her throat, the way her lips parted when she was thinking. "Weston," she said quietly. "Yeah?" I'm scared. Of what? Of wanting this too much. Of forgetting to protect myself because being with you feels like coming home. The confession hit him harder than any poetry she'd ever performed. Here was someone who'd spent years building independence, admitting that connection with him felt worth risking that hard-won self-sufficiency. What if protecting yourself isn't the goal anymore? He asked gently. What is? What if the goal is building something together that's stronger than either of us could create alone? That requires trust. Yes. And I've never trusted anyone completely. Not even Hakeem, and I'd die for him. What would it take for you to trust me? Amina considered the question seriously, her dark eyes searching his face. Time, she said finally. Consistency. Proof that you see me as an equal partner, not a project or a prize. How do I prove that? By choosing me when it's difficult. By supporting my independence instead of trying to eliminate my struggles. By loving who I am now, not who you think I could become with your help. Weston reached across the table, covering her hand with his own. I already love who you are now. The words escaped before he could censor them. Too much, too soon, too honest for their second official date. But Amina didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand palm up, intertwining their fingers. Say that again in 6 months, she said softly. When the novelty wears off and you've seen me struggle with rent and worry about Hakeem and work myself exhausted trying to balance everything. I will. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Because watching you handle those struggles is what made me fall for you in the first place. Your strength, your determination, your refusal to let circumstances define your worth, those aren't flaws to be fixed. They're the reasons you're extraordinary. Amina's eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. You can't say things like that to me. Why not? Because I'm already halfway in love with you, and hearing you understand me that clearly makes me want to fall the rest of the way. Then fall. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. What about your business partner? Your social circle? Elena's sister? What about them? They won't approve. I don't need their approval. I need yours. And when choosing me costs you? Socially? Financially? Then those costs were worth paying. Amina studied his face, looking for signs of doubt or reservation. You say that now. I'll say it then, too. How can you be so sure? Because I've spent years living without passion, without purpose, without any reason to wake up beyond obligation. You've given me all of those things back. Whatever the cost, it's less than the price of going back to that emptiness. The words seemed to break something open in her expression. Vulnerability flickered across her features before she caught herself, but not before Weston glimpsed the depth of her feelings. This is happening fast, she whispered. Does that scare you? Terrifies me. Good. If it didn't scare you, it wouldn't be worth doing. They finished dinner in comfortable intimacy, a connection that felt both new and inevitable. As they walked back to his car, Amina slipped her hand into his, the simple contact sending electricity up his arm. Weston? Yeah? When we get back to my building, would you like to come up? Just for coffee. Just to talk. The invitation was casual, but he heard the deeper question underneath. Was he ready for the intimacy of her personal space? Ready to cross another line in their courtship? I'd love to. Her apartment felt different in the evening light, more intimate and personal. Hakeem was still out, leaving them alone in a space that reflected Amina's personality in ways public venues couldn't capture. Books everywhere, poetry collections mixed with medical journals Hakeem had left behind. Art that spoke to beauty rather than investment potential. The lived-in comfort of a home rather than a showcase. Coffee, she offered, but they both knew conversation was more important than caffeine. They ended up on her small couch, close enough to touch but not quite touching, talking about everything and nothing until the words gave way to awareness of each other's proximity. "Amina," Weston said quietly. "Yeah? Thank you for tonight. For letting me meet Hakeem, for dinner, for bringing me here. For trusting me with pieces of your life. Thank you for seeing them as precious instead of problems to solve. Everything about you is precious." The words seemed to affect her physically. Her breathing quickened, and she turned to face him more fully on the small couch. This close, he could see flecks of gold in her dark eyes, could smell the faint scent of cocoa butter on her skin. "Weston," she said, and his name sounded different in her voice. More intimate, more weighted with possibility. "Yeah? I want to kiss you. But if we cross that line, everything changes. Everything's already changed. Not like this. This would make it real in ways we can't take back. Do you want to take it back?" "No. But I want you to be sure. I've never been more sure of anything." Amina searched his face one more time, looking for doubt or hesitation. When she found none, she moved closer, close enough that their breathing synchronized, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "Then kiss me," she whispered. Weston cupped her face in his hands, thumbs tracing the high curves of her cheekbones, memorizing the moment before everything changed. When their lips finally met, it was soft at first, tentative, a question being asked and answered simultaneously. Then something ignited. The distance they'd maintained shattered as Amina's arms wound around his neck, pulling him closer. Weston's hands tangled in her hair, their kiss deepening into something desperate and necessary and completely overwhelming. Years of emotional numbness crashed against the intensity of finally feeling everything at once. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, foreheads pressed together, hearts racing in synchronization. "That was..." Amina started. "Yeah. We're in trouble now. The best kind of trouble." She laughed, the sound breathless and full of wonder. "What do we do now?" "Now we figure out how to make this work. Even when it gets complicated? Especially when it gets complicated." Amina pulled back enough to look at his face, her dark eyes serious despite her smile. "Weston?" "Yeah? I'm falling in love with you. Completely, terrifyingly, no going back in love with you." "Good," he said, pulling her close again. "Because I'm already there." As they held each other on her small couch in the lamplight of her modest apartment, both knew they were crossing a point of no return. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and there would be many, they would face them together. The glass towers had finally shattered, and neither wanted to go back to living behind walls. Chapter 5. 3 weeks of stolen moments couldn't prepare them for the storm gathering in the corporate towers above their fragile happiness. Weston and Amina had been living in a bubble of late-night dinners and weekend poetry readings, building intimacy in spaces where their different worlds didn't collide. But Monday morning brought reality crashing down with the subtlety of a hostile takeover. "We need to discuss your cleaning lady." Yolanda King's voice cut through Weston's morning coffee like a scalpel, her expression sharp enough to draw blood. She closed his office door with deliberate precision. "Her name is Amina Davis. I don't care what her name is. I care that you're compromising this company's reputation with an inappropriate workplace relationship. There's nothing inappropriate about two adults choosing to spend time together. Isn't there?" Yolanda moved to his window, looking out at the city they'd helped shape through decades of ruthless business deals. A CEO dating an employee creates liability exposure. Sexual harassment lawsuits. Discrimination claims. The board won't tolerate the risk. The board works for me. The board works for shareholders. And if those shareholders lose confidence in your judgment, you'll find yourself outvoted faster than you can liquidate your stock options. Weston set down his coffee, studying Yolanda's reflection in the window. "What are you really worried about, Yolanda?" "Your focus. Your reputation. Your ability to lead this company without personal complications undermining your authority. Or your ability to maintain influence if I start making decisions based on personal happiness instead of quarterly projections? Yolanda turned to face him, her smile sharp. Careful, Weston. Personal attacks suggest emotional compromise. Exactly what I'm concerned about. And what exactly are you proposing I do? End it cleanly, with an appropriate compensation for any inconvenience caused. Compensation? Generous severance package. Job placement assistance. Whatever it takes to resolve this situation without legal complications. The suggestion hit Weston like ice water. Here was everything Amina had warned him about, the assumption that their relationship was a problem to be solved with money, that she was a complication to be managed rather than a person to be loved. Get out, he said quietly. Excuse me? Get out of my office before I say something we'll both regret. Yolanda's eyes narrowed. Think carefully about your next moves, Weston. Some lines, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. After she left, Weston sat alone in his corner office, staring out at the city that suddenly felt smaller and more suffocating. The confrontation he'd known was coming had finally arrived, and it was worse than anticipated. His phone buzzed with a text from Sonia, family dinner tonight. 7 p.m. Elena's favorite restaurant. Don't make excuses. The timing felt coordinated. Yolanda and Sonia had never been allies, but they shared common interest in controlling his choices. Meanwhile, 42 floors below, Amina was discovering that secrets in corporate buildings had the lifespan of gossip in small towns. You need to be careful, honey, Ruby Freeman warned as they restocked cleaning supplies in the service elevator. Word spreading about you and the boss man. What kind of word? The kind that suggests you're overstepping your boundaries. Some people are saying you're using your position to get close to him for personal gain. Amina felt heat rise in her cheeks. And what do you think? I think that man's been walking around like someone switched the lights back on in his soul. And I think you've been glowing like a woman in love. But what I think doesn't matter if management decides you're a liability. Meaning? Meaning your contract comes up for renewal next month. And contracts have been terminated for less than workplace relationships with senior executives. The warning hit Amina harder than expected. She'd been so focused on emotional obstacles that she'd underestimated practical ones. Losing her job would mean losing Hakeem's financial support just as medical school became reality instead of dream. That evening, while Weston endured Sonia's emotional manipulation over dinner, Amina sat in her apartment trying to solve an equation with no acceptable variables. You're thinking too loud, Hakeem observed from the kitchen table where he was studying organic chemistry. What's wrong? Work complications. Weston complications. It wasn't a question. Hakeem had developed radar for his sister's emotional states, particularly where wealthy CEOs were concerned. Both. Want to talk about it? Amina looked at her brother and felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like lead. What would you do if loving someone meant risking everything you'd worked for? Depends on whether the love was worth the risk. And if other people were counting on you? If your choices affected more than just yourself? Hakeem closed his textbook, giving her his full attention. Amina, are you asking if I'd want you to sacrifice your happiness for my education? I'm asking if love is worth jeopardizing security. The wrong love isn't worth anything. The right love is worth everything. How do you tell the difference? The right love makes you braver, not smaller. It doesn't ask you to choose between your heart and your principles. Amina studied her brother's face, wondering when he'd become wise enough to see through her questions to the real dilemma underneath. And if the choice isn't that simple? If there are consequences either way? Then you choose the path that lets you look at yourself in the mirror without regret. That night, while Amina wrestled with impossible choices, Weston was learning exactly how much pressure Sonia could apply when she felt her late sister's memory was being threatened. She looks nothing like Elena, Sonia said over dessert at the restaurant where he'd proposed 5 years earlier. The venue choice was deliberate emotional manipulation, and they both knew it. That's not the point. Isn't it? Elena was refined, educated, appropriate for someone in your position. This woman is brilliant, strong. A janitor, Weston. She's a janitor. She's a poet who happens to work as a janitor. There's a difference. Not to the people who matter in your world. Maybe those people don't matter as much as I thought. Sonia leaned forward, her voice dropping to the intimate tone she reserved for her most effective guilt trips. My sister loved your ambition. She was proud of what you built together. Throwing that away for some temporary infatuation dishonors everything she sacrificed to support your career. Elena sacrificed nothing. I'm the one who sacrificed time, attention, presence, for career advancement that meant nothing when she was gone. You're rewriting history to justify selfish choices. I'm finally being honest about choices I was too cowardly to examine while she was alive. The words hung between them like accusations. Sonia's face went pale, then flushed with anger. How dare you suggest Elena wasn't enough for you? She was everything she needed to be. I wasn't everything I needed to be for her. And you think this cleaning woman can fix that? I think Amina sees who I actually am instead of who I'm supposed to be. And for the first time in my adult life, I like what someone sees when they look at me. Sonia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against expensive hardwood. When you come to your senses, don't expect the family to welcome you back. After she left, Weston sat alone at their table, surrounded by memories of a life that had felt sufficient until he discovered what passionate love actually meant. For the first time since Elena's death, he wasn't mourning their marriage. He was finally understanding what they'd both missed. The next morning brought the crisis neither had anticipated. Amina arrived at work to find her employee badge deactivated and her supervisor waiting with a termination letter. No explanation beyond restructuring of service contracts and position elimination due to budget constraints. But the timing was too convenient, the language too sanitized to be anything other than retaliation. She was gathering her personal items when Weston found her. What happened? He demanded, his voice carrying. I've been terminated. Effective immediately. On what grounds? Budget restructuring. Position elimination. Amina's voice was steady, but Weston could see the fury burning in her dark eyes. Amazing how my position became expendable 24 hours after someone decided our relationship was inappropriate. This is Yolanda's doing. Does it matter? The result is the same. Weston pulled out his phone. I'm calling an emergency board meeting. This is corporate retaliation, and it's illegal. No. Amina's hand covered his, stopping him mid-dial. Don't make this worse. Worse? They fired you for dating me. How could it possibly be worse? Because fighting this makes me exactly what they're saying I am, a woman using her relationship with you to get special treatment. You're not using anything. You're being punished for my choices. Our choices. And I won't hide behind your power to fix the consequences. Then what do you want to do? Amina looked around the service area where they'd had their first real conversation, where she'd cleaned up after other people's dreams while nurturing her own. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet dignity that had first attracted him to her poetry. I want to walk out of here with my head high, knowing I didn't compromise my principles even when it cost me everything. And us? What happens to us? I don't know. The honesty in those words hit Weston harder than any accusation could have. Amina wasn't breaking up with him, but she wasn't fighting for them either. She was simply acknowledging that their relationship had just become exponentially more complicated. Amina, please. Let me fix this. You can't fix this without proving their point about me. What point? That I'm with you for what you can do for me instead of who you are. That's ridiculous. Is it? Because from the outside, this looks exactly like what everyone expected. Powerful man helps struggling woman, then uses his influence to protect her when she gets in trouble. You didn't get in trouble. You got targeted. Same result. And if you fight this battle for me, I become your project instead of your partner. Weston felt the impossible bind she was describing. Every instinct told him to use his position to reverse this injustice, but doing so would undermine the very independence that made Amina extraordinary. So what do we do? I figure out my next move without your help. You decide whether this relationship is worth the cost. You're testing me. I'm giving you space to make an honest choice about what you can handle. I've already made that choice. You made it when the cost was theoretical. Now it's real. Before Weston could respond, Yolanda appeared in the service hallway, her expression perfectly neutral. "Ms. Davis," she said with practiced corporate sympathy. "I understand this morning's development was unexpected. I want you to know this decision was purely financial, nothing personal." "Of course," Amina replied evenly. "I'm sure it was. Your severance package is quite generous. And I've provided excellent references for future employment opportunities." How thoughtful. Yolanda's smile was perfectly calibrated. "I hope you understand that discretion regarding your time here would be appreciated. Corporate environments rely on maintaining boundaries." "Are you threatening me?" Amina asked quietly. "I'm suggesting that positive references depend on positive transitions." The exchange was happening in code, but the meaning was crystal clear. Keep quiet about the real reason for termination, or face retaliation that would extend far beyond Langford Industries. "Ms. Davis understands completely," Weston interjected, his voice carrying dangerous undertones. "Just as I'm sure you understand that retaliatory employment practices carry significant legal exposure." "I'm sure I don't know what you mean," Yolanda replied smoothly. Ms. Davis's termination was thoroughly documented and legally justified. The standoff lasted exactly 10 seconds before Amina broke the tension. "Thank you for the generous severance," she said to Yolanda. "And thank you for everything, Weston. Both of you have been illuminating." She walked away before either could respond, leaving Weston and Yolanda facing each other in the sterile hallway that had become a battlefield. "You think you've won," Weston said quietly. "I think I've protected this company from unnecessary complications. You've made the biggest mistake of your life." "Have I?" "Because from where I stand, you're about to choose between a woman you've known for 2 months and a business partnership you've spent 15 years building." Yolanda walked away, leaving Weston alone with the wreckage of his world. That evening, Amina sat in her apartment staring at employment websites and fighting the urge to call Weston. Hakeem found her there when he came home from his study group. "How bad?" he asked, settling onto the couch beside her. "Bad. I lost my job." "Because of Weston?" "Because of us. Because someone decided our relationship was inappropriate for corporate image." "And Weston? What's he doing about it?" "Nothing. Because I asked him not to." Hakeem studied her profile, reading the tension in her jaw and the control in her voice. "Why?" "Because being rescued by your boyfriend's corporate power isn't the same as being valued as an equal partner. Even if it costs us everything. Especially then." They sat in silence for several minutes, both contemplating the financial implications of her unemployment. Without her cleaning job, Hakeem's living expenses would require her diner income plus whatever new employment she could find quickly. "Amina," Hakeem said finally. "Yeah? Do you love him?" "Completely." "Does he love you?" "I think so. But love and staying power aren't the same thing." "What do you mean?" "I mean it's easy to love someone when it's convenient. The test comes when love requires sacrifice." "What kind of sacrifice?" "His reputation. His business relationships. His comfortable life. And you don't think he'll make those sacrifices? I don't know. And I can't ask him to prove it by fighting battles that compromise who I need to be. Hakeem nodded slowly, understanding the impossible position she'd described. So what happens now? Now I find another job, keep us afloat, and see if Weston Langford is brave enough to choose love over safety. And if he's not? Then I'll know I was right to protect my independence. And if he is? For the first time that day, Amina smiled. Then maybe we figure out how to build something neither of us could create alone. Days passed before Weston made his choice. 3 days of board meetings and legal consultations and sleepless nights staring at his ceiling, weighing everything he'd spent his adult life building against everything he'd just discovered was possible. On Thursday morning, he called an emergency board meeting. I'm restructuring my role, he announced to the assembled executives, including a notably tense Yolanda King. Effective immediately, I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations to focus on strategic development and long-term vision. What does that mean, practically? Asked board member Harrison Walsh. It means Roger Willis will assume operational control as acting president, with full authority over daily management decisions. I'll maintain my position as chairman and majority shareholder, but I'm removing myself from situations where personal relationships could be perceived as conflicts of interest. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Yolanda's face had gone pale. You're doing this because of the cleaning woman, she said finally. I'm doing this because I'm tired of living a life that requires me to choose between professional success and personal authenticity. If this company can't function without compromising my values, then maybe it's time to reevaluate what we're building here. You'll destroy everything we've worked for. I'll transform it into something worth working for. Weston stood, collecting his papers with steady hands. Roger, you'll find detailed transition notes on your desk. The Morrison acquisition is yours to close. The Henderson portfolio needs aggressive management. Any questions? Roger Willis looked stunned but determined. No, sir. I'll handle everything. I know you will. As Weston headed for the door, Yolanda's voice stopped him. Where are you going? To find out if love is worth the risk when it's not theoretical anymore. He found Amina at Murphy's diner where she'd picked up extra shifts, wearing a uniform that was identical to her cleaning clothes but somehow looked completely different on her. She moved through the dining room with the same unconscious grace he'd first noticed, but there was new energy about her, the confidence of someone who'd faced her worst fear and discovered she could survive it. She looked up when the bell chimed his entrance, surprise flickering across her face. We're about to change shifts, she said quietly. I can get someone else to take your table. I'm not here for food. Then what are you here for? To tell you that I restructured my position at Langford Industries. To apologize for taking days to figure out what should have been obvious. And to ask if you're still interested in building something together. Amina set down the coffee pot she'd been holding, her dark eyes searching his face for something she couldn't name. What kind of restructuring? The kind that removes me from any position where I could be accused of using corporate power to benefit my personal relationships. And your business partnership with Yolanda? Officially dissolved as of this morning. She'll receive a generous buyout package and excellent references, but she's no longer my problem to manage. That must have cost you. Less than losing you would have cost. Amina glanced around the diner, aware of customers and coworkers watching their conversation with undisguised curiosity. Can we talk somewhere private? Your choice of venue. Give me 10 minutes to finish my shift. They drove separately to the same riverside park where they'd first acknowledged their feelings for each other. This time, the October air carried bite that suggested winter was approaching, but neither seemed to notice the cold. They drove separately to the same riverside park where they'd first acknowledged their feelings for each other. This time, the October air carried bite that suggested winter was approaching, but neither seemed to notice the cold. You gave up operational control of your company, Amina said as they found their previous bench. I changed my role to eliminate conflicts of interest. That's not the same thing. No, it's not. I chose you over convenience, Amina. I chose us over everything I thought mattered. And tomorrow? When the reality sets in and you realize what you've sacrificed. Tomorrow I'll wake up next to someone who makes me want to be better than I am. Someone who challenges me to live authentically instead of safely. Someone who sees my worth in ways that have nothing to do with my bank account or business reputation. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Because I've spent the past few days imagining life without you, and it looked exactly like the empty existence I'd been living before we met. Amina was quiet for a long moment, studying his face in the fading daylight. The job situation is still complicated, she said finally. I know. But now it's complicated by choice instead of retaliation. And if your corporate restructuring doesn't work? If clients lose confidence or investors start asking questions? Then I'll build something new. With you, if you're willing. Build what? I don't know yet. But I know it'll be more authentic than anything I've created before. Amina turned to face him fully on the bench, her expression serious but no longer guarded. Weston? Yeah. The past 3 days were hell. For me too. Not because I lost my job. Because I thought I'd lost you. You'll never lose me. Don't make promises you can't keep. I'm not. I'm making a commitment I intend to honor. What kind of commitment? Weston reached for her hands, holding them gently in his own. The kind that chooses you every day, not just when it's easy. The kind that builds something together instead of trying to fit you into spaces you were never meant to occupy. The kind that loves your strength instead of trying to eliminate your struggles. And if those struggles continue? If money stays tight and opportunities stay limited and nothing changes except us? Then we'll face those challenges together. As equals. As partners. As people who choose love over safety even when love requires sacrifice. Amina's eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. I love you, she whispered. Completely, terrifyingly, no going back love you. I love you too. Past tense, present tense, future tense, every version of love I'm capable of feeling. When he kissed her this time, it felt different. Not like a beginning, but like a promise. Not like discovery, but like coming home. They sat together as darkness fell around them, holding each other against the October cold and planning a future that would require courage from both of them. But for the first time since they'd met, neither was afraid of what that future might hold. Love, it turned out, was worth every risk when it was chosen freely by two people brave enough to build something real. 6 months later, Amina Davis published her first collection of poetry to critical acclaim and commercial success. The book, titled Shattered Glass, explored themes of dignity, class, and the courage required to love across seemingly impossible divides. The dedication read, "For Weston, who taught me that the bravest thing we can do is let someone see us completely." Weston Langford's restructured company thrived under Roger Willis's operational leadership, while Weston himself discovered that strategic planning suited him better than micromanagement. More importantly, he discovered that authentic relationships were more satisfying than corporate achievements. He started a foundation supporting working artists, with Amina as its first board member and creative director. Hakeem Davis graduated magna cum laude from Johns Hopkins and was accepted into Harvard's medical school with full funding. At the acceptance celebration, he toasted his sister and her partner for showing him what it looked like to choose courage over comfort. But the real victory wasn't in external achievements. It was in the quiet moments, Amina performing new poems while Weston listened from the audience, not hiding but celebrating their connection. Weston supporting her independence while she navigated book tours and literary interviews. Both of them learning that true partnership meant loving someone's strength rather than trying to eliminate their struggles. They'd shattered their glass towers and built something better together. A love that was authentic, equal, and brave enough to face whatever challenges came next. Because the best love stories aren't about rescue or transformation. They're about two people choosing each other, again and again, until choosing becomes as natural as breathing. They're about finding someone who sees your worth when the world refuses to look, and loving them back with the same fierce recognition. In the end, that's what Amina and Weston discovered, that real love doesn't save you from yourself. It gives you the courage to become who you were always meant to be. What barriers have you torn down for love? Share your story of choosing vulnerability over safety in the comments below. Your courage might inspire someone else to take that leap. Subscribe for more stories about love that transforms. Like if this touched your heart. Comment with your own tale of unexpected connection that changed everything. Tomorrow, discover what happens when a woman hiding her past meets a man determined to uncover every secret. Another passionate journey unfolds in our diary of love.